Good morning, and thank you for your invitation to participate in your conference on complex fluids. I hope you're all doing well, and I hope that in the near future we will have an opportunity to meet in person. Today I will talk to you about a complex phenomenon related to a very complex fluid, the phenomenon being condensation and the fluid being water. And the phenomenon of condensation of water takes place in nature very commonly, as you can see here on top, on many surfaces, and many very important applications of human engineering, like thermal power plants, water harvesting, separation plants, and so on and so forth. But I'm not going to talk about the above today. Today I will focus on an interesting manifestation of condensation on transparent surfaces. All right, so where condensation is a serious annoyance, because it doesn't let us look through those surfaces that are transparent. Because of that reason, because we want to really in our applications look through the surfaces from sports, health, and windows. And I will talk to you about a new concept, the so-called transparent photothermal metasurfaces that we've developed that utilize sunlight to mitigate condensation and also amplify superhydrophobicity of surfaces for a host of applications. So then the talk will have as a common denominator the transparency for the thermal metasurfaces. It will have two parts. The first will focus on counteracting fogging, unwanted fogging on transparent surfaces by harnessing sunlight, and the second part will be amplifying superhydrophobicity of warm water on surfaces. All right. I'm going relatively fast due to the limited time, but the motivation here is clear, and you see it in front of you. I will not dwell on this very much. Instead, I will go to the root of the problem of condensation on surfaces, and in this case, transparent surfaces, which is, of course, the deposition of water when it reaches a state above saturation due to temperature changes or increase in humidity, in terms of small droplets that have the effect of, instead of allowing the light to go directly to our light, they cause scattering of light, which of course we feel in our brain as fogging. Right? There are solutions to this problem with limited success. The most interesting one and more commercially available one is the one that here on the left, of making simply the surface super hydrophilic. So we don't have these small droplets, we have a thin layer of water, and we mostly alleviate this fogging. Unfortunately, this, as you know, and if you bought some of these liquids that don't work very well, because the liquid dries and we almost immediately have limited effects. The film has a non-uniform condensation on islands of wet and dry spots, and those things don't work very well. There are laboratory surfaces that use very early superhydrophobicity, that is, they expel these little tiny droplets at their formation. As you see by this example here, those of course, laboratory experiments are not done on transparent surfaces, and they're very difficult, of course, to basically put them on glass, and therefore they will not work really in the case we were interested with. And then, of course, you have the so-called sweeter surfaces that, while they are phobic, they absorb vapor, water vapor, and up to a point avoid the formation of droplets with very limited success, and again, no commercial success on glasses we use in everyday life. Our approach, I call it a new approach, is effectively based on an old concept, that of heating, but instead of using Joule heating, as you see here, have to watch the time, we do use sunlight, and effectively you will see how we do that. But the reason why heating works extremely well is the dependence of the nucleation rate, as you see here, of water on a surface on temperature, which is a very strong exponential dependence. And if you plot it here for an example, let's say here for a certain sort of contact angle and so on and so forth, you see that, of course, a couple of degrees of change, or even 1 degree of change of the temperature, increase of the temperature, can drop the nucleation rates by several, 4 in this particular example, this orders of magnitude. So if we were able to utilize sunlight while maintaining, of course, transparency, because why don't we paint it black? So we'll effectively absorb all sunlight, but then we'll lose transparency. If we were able to maintain the the transparency and utilize sunlight, then we could have hopefully some effect that ameliorating fogging due to condensation. And to do that, we utilize the plasmonic effect, which is a heating effect when you have small amounts of metal particles, nanoparticles in this example, embedded in a dielectric and interact with sunlight. The free electrons in those particles will start oscillate, and these oscillations can hit resonance, of course, when you match the frequency of the sunlight with the design of the nanoparticle material and size, right? And this strong oscillations will be lost into heat, as I saw down here, and this heat will give us the desirable effect, which effect can become now not at one frequency effect, but a broadband effect for many frequencies if you have many of these particles in your matrix, and in which effect you have this desired broadening, and then you can cover a broad part of the spectrum, and at the same time try then to design it such that you do not cover, then you do not absorb in the visible, right? And we do that, again, unfortunately, I have no time for details. We did that by designing the surfaces by a sputtering process of metals and dielectrics, titanium dioxide in this particular example, and gold, and the metal breaks up into islands that diffuse into the dielectric and make this kind of matrices. And as you see here, and this of course talks about absorption, you can design it so you have low absorption in this limit here of percolation for a certain amount of sort of metal volumetric concentration that comes from theory. You can have high absorption beyond the visible into the infrared, where actually 50% roughly of the energy of sunlight resides. So this is pretty good. This transition is not abrupt, of course. It is a gradual transition, which means that you will be losing a little bit of transparency, but certainly this is within the acceptable range. Keep in mind that the windows of most cars nowadays are at about 40% transparency. You can see very well through them, right? Now, I have no time for further details on this, but I'm going to show you an example of how well these surfaces work. And you have here in a test in a laboratory at one sun, a control surface, a state-of-the-art hydrophilic surface, and our metal surface, and you see how much better, of course, our metal surface with the action of sunlight. They're all, of course, hit by sunlight, but only this one will absorb in the infrared and have a tremendous resistance to fogging. And I have a second video, and that, of course, is related to the pandemic, where you have this fellow here is wearing these glasses. He starts exhaling, is in sunlight, and immediately within seconds you have defogging of the coated side of these glasses, prescription glasses, while the other side remains fogged. So the technology works very well, and we've developed several generations of these materials to date. Some of them we've not published, but we've submitted patents, and the publications will be coming out. Additional publications, that is, with the new generations of the materials, will be coming out next year. So now I'm moving on with my outline, and I'm moving to the second sort of category of problems where our concepts of photothermal metal surfaces can work very well, and that is amplifying superhydrophobicity of surfaces to warm water. Because, you know, how is superhydrophobicity compromised? Of course, we all know that when you have a superhydrophobic surface, those are usually surfaces with a design roughness, so to speak. You see here a typical pillar surface, and of course you have a droplet impacting on this surface with a certain Weber number, as you see here. And then, of course, you have the so-called impalement within the surface, and this is a pressure-based impalement because the droplet, of course, impacts. The inertia overcomes surface tension effects. The droplet sinks inside the structure, and when it rebounds, it breaks up, and part of it stays in, going from because, you know, of course, it reaches what's called the Wenzel state. Another less observed kind of super hydrophobicity compromise is thermal. Assume that you have a warmer droplet than the temperature of the substrate that comes very close to the substrate, and we deposit it very carefully with a Weber number, let's say almost 0. Then what happens is when the droplet sits on the surface, you have a certain wetting, but if you let it rest there a little bit, you observe, of course, that the droplet spreads, right? So it goes, then transitions from an initial near Casey state to what we call in superhydrophobicity Wenzel state, where the droplet is now sitting, goes through the roughness, and it is impaled, right? And that is because of the fact that you have this warmer droplet, then you have evaporation from the droplet toward the substrate, and this evaporation sits inside the structure of the substrate and wets, of course, the roughness, causing then the further spread of the droplet, and and then a transition to the Wenzel state, an impalement. Okay, so this is an unwanted effect due to the temperature difference. And then we thought to use our concept of photothermal metasurface coating for superhydrophobic surfaces, and you see how we did it here. I'm not going to go through the details, but we went ahead and took a hydrophobic surface with a pillar laboratory surface in this particular example, and we did the technology that I described earlier. So this plasmonic metasurface coating, and you see if we do that, we don't lose much in transparency. The thing stays transparent. Okay, as you see between the control surface and the plasmonic surface, we haven't lost a lot of transparency, and then the behavior would be much better. We went a step further. And of course, because the question is, well, why do you do that? And you don't simply make the surface as super hydrophobic as possible. And you can do that when you take your pillar surface and you add the roughness in it. So you have a hierarchical surface, as you see here. So we took then the plasmonic metasurface and we added to that super hydrophobic option. And then we saw, the effect of both. We looked into the case where we have a micropillar surface, a super hydrophobic micropillar surface, and a micropillar surface with a nano roughness that goes on top of our metasurface effect. You see that the additional layer bringing the nano roughness does not affect very much the transparency. And then I'm going to close by showing you, due to time limitations, the experiments that we did. Now you have a Weber number which is relatively high, 73, for a water and surface temperature of 21 degrees. And you see that in this particular example, you have impaled, right? Now, if you do the same thing with a micropillars and a nano roughness, that is, without having activated the photothermal ability, let's say, of the surface, that is, there is no light, no light falling on the surface, or you don't have, of course, that metasurface, then you achieve, of course, the same effect for that temperature, right? So now if you increase the temperature to 32 degrees, and you have now the best you can do in terms of a super hydrophobic surface, which is micropillars with nano roughness, is a hierarchical state-of-the-art surface. You do realize that, of course, those surfaces, because of the effect that I said before, because there's the slight evaporation and condensation effect, do not do the job. That is at 32 degrees already, you have impalement for this Weber number of 95 on the super hydrophobic surface, whereas for a lower temperature, they were working. And now we go to our super hydrophobic photothermal metasurfaces within one sun illumination, and you see how beautiful they work. They repel the water away from the surface, because of the combined effect, of course, the photothermal effect, plasmonic effect that I mentioned earlier, and the super hydrophobic effect. So that was my last slide. I hope you enjoyed the talk. 15 minutes is not a very long time, but I hope you have an opportunity to listen to it carefully, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you very much.